I'm here today with Rhonda Rivera. It's June 20th, 2006, about 1 p.m. at the home of Mary Ann Neal. Could you go ahead and state your name, please?
Rhonda Rivera.
And what is your ethnic background or makeup?
As far as I know, I'm a Caucasian of English, Irish, Welsh, and Scotch background.
And do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have a half-brother who is deceased, who was the son of my father by his first marriage.
And where did you spend your childhood?
Most of it in Roosevelt, New Jersey.
Where did you go to high school at?
I went to high school to Palmyra High School in New Jersey.
And you also attended college as well, is that correct?
Yeah, I went to Douglas College in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
And what degree did you obtain?
I had a bachelor's degree with honors in economics.
Okay. When you were a child and young adult, do you recall thinking of any particular people as being your heroes?
Yes. Harry Truman and Eleanor Roosevelt and Adlai Stevenson.
And for each one, can you tell me just briefly why you considered them a hero?
Obviously, Eleanor Roosevelt was a woman, and I was a woman. And she wasn't a particularly attractive woman, and I was never particularly attractive. But she had accomplished a great deal, was a straight shooter. And I said that's what I admired about Harry, just he was a straight shooter. And I think what I admired about Adlai Stevenson was his eloquence, his beautiful use of the English language. I mean, he had good views too, but on top of that, he really spoke well.
And how old were you when you realized that you were gay?
Well, I had my first inkling when I was 11. I had my first sexual contact when I was 16. But I really didn't come out per se until I was about 35.
Tell me about when you realized that you were gay when you were 11, or you had your first inkling. What was that?
I had a girlfriend stay over. There were a couple of things, but one was I had a girlfriend stay over for a pajama party kind of thing, and we were sleeping in the same bed. And I had an urge to do something with her. I didn't know enough to know what I wanted to do, but I also knew that I'd be in big trouble if I did anything, and it was all intuitive. Plus, in high school, I really wasn't terribly interested in boys except as friends. I didn't really understand why many of my girlfriends used to get so overwrought about the whole situation.
When you were 11 and you first had these feelings or these desires, did you tell anyone?
No. Plus, it wasn't, this was about 1950. And there was no information. There was no discussion. So, I probably didn't even know how to talk about it.
After your first experience with physical contact with another woman or girl when you were 16, did you discuss that with anyone? How did that?
No, I never discussed that with anyone either, other than the person involved.
Did a continuing sort of relationship result from that experience?
Well, it was the first time I was really in love, and it was my roommate in college. And she was going to go to nursing school. Then you went to college the first 2 years, and then you went to nursing school. And so at the end of the second year, she went into New York City to continue her education at Cornell Nursing School. I went in to see her, a couple of weeks later. And she called me up to her room and basically told me I was sinful and had seduced her into this terrible abomination and sin, and that she never wanted to see me again. And I was just totally distraught. I was very young for being in college. I was only just practically 18 after 2 years of college, and it was totally unexpected. It broke my heart, and there was nobody to talk to about it.
So you started college prior to 18?
Oh yeah, I was 16 when
And that was unusual at that time.
Yes.
What was the reason that?
Because I skipped grades.
Okay. And so you were able in school to learn faster at a faster rate than the regular students?
Yeah. I was reasonably intelligent.
All right. So you started college at 16?
Yes.
Wow. Was that a challenge? I mean, even if you were mentally, IQ-wise prepared?
Yes, I was very naive. Plus, I went to a South Jersey high school where I got straight A's. But South Jersey high schools weren't as good as North Jersey high schools. So when I went to college, I was competing for many women from North Jersey. And it took me about a year to a year and a half to catch up. And that was very frustrating because I was always used to being on top of things. And, and all of a sudden I had to work a little harder.
Do you consider yourself an overachiever?
I don't think I'm an overachiever, but I think I'm an achiever.
When you were growing up, did you ever hear people talk about gay people or people who were gay, or insinuate that somebody was different for some sort of a reason?
Not a thing.
Did you know of people who you now realize?
One of the guys in my high school class, I realize now, and I knew sort of something, when we were in high school. He was one of my best friends, and now I realize he was a real flaming faggot. But I just didn't. I've never been very socially conscious. It's not my strong point. I used to say that I could go to a party and everybody could be naked, and I'd never know. I'd be talking to them, and it just never occurred to me that they were naked. So,
when you started college, did you live at home with your family?
the way.
Were you on campus, like in a dormitory?
Yeah.
How far away was your family from?
Well, when I started out, they were about an hour. But during my first year of school, they moved to Chicago, and I was still in New Jersey. So we were pretty far apart. And that first Christmas, I took a train to Chicago.
Meet other gay people or learn about more information about being gay while you were doing your undergraduate degree?
Not much. It's 1951 to, 55 to 59. No, I really didn't. I wish I had. If I could have gone into New York and had any sort of person that I knew, there was a whole life there that I had no clue about.
You mentioned a moment ago that you came out when you were 35.
Approximately, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I was married, and even when I was married, I had some feelings for women, but I'd married for better or worse, and I'd probably still be married if my husband had been a good husband and a good father. And I actually could have put up with him not being a particularly good husband if he'd been a good father. But he was a shit-ass father and a shit-ass husband. And so I divorced him. The last year that we lived together in the same house, but it was just for convenience, financial convenience. And once we had signed our separation agreement, I began looking for a woman that would make my heart go pitter-patter. And it turned out that the first woman who made my heart go pitter-patter was a woman where her husband and my husband and her children and she's my son's godmother, was the first person I really loved my husband. I really, truly did. And she was the second person I really loved. And so I suppose we would say we had an affair. She actually is my partner now, 37 years later. That's a whole other story.
So how old were you when you got married?
Got married in 1960, so I would have been, 1960, so I was in 1938, 48, 58, 22.
All right. And how long were you married?
Hmm?
How long were you married?
13 years.
13 years. How did your husband or former husband take the revelation that you preferred women?
He didn't. He's an interesting person. I don't think that ever really bothered him one way or the other, to the best of my knowledge.
Who was the first person that you said, I'm gay or something similar to?
The dean of the college that I worked for in Grand Valley, in Michigan, who was a lesbian.
So I'm assuming you got a positive reaction. It was something that was...
I mean, she was the first person I'd ever seen in an actual job, successful, who clearly to me was gay. I really hadn't seen many gay people. I don't think young people today can understand how it wasn't a media event, that you didn't discuss these things, and people didn't know very much. It just wasn't. Now maybe if you were in New York City or San Francisco, but I was in the boomy docks of Michigan.
All right. So you were attending undergraduate college in New Jersey.
Right. Then I went to Syracuse
you
to get my master's degree.
Okay. And what was
That's when I got married.
And what was your master's degree in?
Public administration.
All right.
With an emphasis in public finance.
All right.
And then I went to Cleveland, where I worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland for 2 years. Then I went to Puerto Rico, where I taught college for 2 years. Then I came back and went to law school for 3 years. And then I went back to college teaching.
All right. Where was it that you attended law school?
I went to Wayne State in Detroit.
All right. At the time that you were attending law school, would you describe yourself as out?
Oh, no. I was still married, and that's when I had my son.
Okay. I understand. So you said you came out when you were 35.
Right.
So that would have been
after
1973?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right. So you finish your bachelor's degree, you finish your master's degree, you go to law school, you get your law degree.
Right.
After you had completed your law degree, what did you do for work at that point in time?
Well, this was 1967, and women weren't supposed to be lawyers in 1967. We moved to Western Michigan, and I tried to get a job as a lawyer, and nobody would hire me because I was a woman. So I opened a small practice of my own. But I basically also went back to college teaching.
And what were you teaching in college?
Economics.
All right. What did people say to you when you tried to get a job as a female attorney? I mean, were people?
They said we don't hire women.
Wow. So they were that blunt.
They're pretty clear. One firm, and Grand Haven had quite a few good sites. It wasn't Detroit or anything, but it had quite a few good sites. It was the county seat. And one firm did offer me a job as a probate clerk for $3.85 an hour. And I was number one in my class. It was quite interesting.
How did you handle that, having completed law school and been number one and then be told you can't be hired because you're a woman?
I was pretty pissed. But I also had a young child at that point. So they tend to keep you busy. You can be pissed as you want, but you're going to be busy.
Did you realize in law school that you were going to have difficulty being able to work as an attorney because
No,
you were a
actually,
woman?
I was sort of oblivious. I'd never had any discrimination. You know, I'd been in essentially somewhat male fields. Economics in that period of time boys were more interested in economics, and public administration was still and I've always done well, so it just never occurred to me that I would have a problem. Then I began to notice it. Actually, I noticed it. It happened to me in law school. I got a scholarship to go to the school, and at the end of the first year, I was number one in my class. And I got this letter from the Law Review asking me to be a member. Well, I didn't know what the Law Review was. I didn't have any lawyers in my family and stuff. And so I went and talked to this guy, and I said, well, what do you do? And he says, well, first of all, we edit other people's articles. And I said, well, that's interesting. When I worked for the Federal Reserve, I had my own editor who edited my articles. And then I said, then do you publish anything or write anything? He says, well, if you're selected in your third year, you'll have to write something, but whether it'll be published is problematic. It has to be chosen. And I already had a list of publications, and I didn't know what the Law Review was in terms of getting jobs and prestige and stuff like that. And so I didn't see any reason to do it. So I just said, well, I don't want to do it. And then they took my scholarship away. They didn't tell me beforehand that if I didn't go into the Law Review, I would lose my scholarship. But after I declined the law school, they didn't like women much in those days in law school. And there was a quota. Women, there was only a certain number of women and a certain number of Jews allowed.
It's 1973. You've decided to end your marriage and to begin a relationship with
whatever woman I could find.
Right. And then you start from there and take me on your journey from there.
I always call it my gay adolescence. It probably wasn't very exciting to other people, but I thought it was. And as I said, my real love was this woman who I knew through my church, and her husband was friends with that kind of crap. We played bridge together. And she seemed to be in love with me too. Then I got a job at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I asked her to come with me. And she wasn't ready. It was too frightening for her to make that big a change in her life. And she said no. So she stayed in Grand Haven, and I went to Ann Arbor as the assistant dean of the University of Michigan Law School. And while I was there, I met a woman that we got together, and we lived together for 6 years. She was a law student at the time. She was a senior law student. And I moved from University of Michigan Law School to, after 2 years, I was an administrator at the University of Michigan, although I did teach one course. Then I moved to Ohio State as a full-time professor, starting as an assistant, becoming an associate in full, that kind of thing.
While you were at Michigan working, were you involved in gay issues?
I became involved sort of unintentionally in a funny way. The Gay Academic Union came to the University of Michigan for their annual, I think they were only like 2 or 3 years old, for an annual meeting. And they wanted somebody to give a program on gay and lesbian legal issues. And they went to the ACLU in Detroit and Ann Arbor, and they went to the National Lawyers Guild in Ann Arbor and Detroit. And those organizations, which you think of as so liberal now, actually were opposed to homosexuality then. It wasn't at the top of their agenda, but they certainly weren't going to defend it. And they refused. And so a student of mine said to the Gay Academic Union, there's this woman who's head of the Feminist Legal Services Clinic, and I don't think they knew I was gay, but they knew I was a feminist. And so they said, she works at law school, maybe she'd be willing to do it. Came to me, I said, I know nothing about it. I said, but if I can get some law students, always use the law students, Mary, law students to help me with research, I'd be glad to try, which is what I did. So I gave this first speech, and I suppose that was the first gay thing I ever did. Oh, that's not true. I forgot about this. I also used to write a column for the Gay Community News in Detroit on legal. I guess it was after I made that speech, they asked me to write a column. And I wrote a column for a year. In fact, the guy from that just contacted me last year. They were doing some sort of historical thing about the gay community news, and he sent me all the old articles that I'd written, which I totally, forgotten. So the two things I did was make that speech and write the articles.
All right. How many years were you then an administrator
Two.
In Michigan? All right. And from there you came to Ohio State?
Yep.
What led you to come to Ohio State?
Well, what I learned is that as an administrator at the University of Michigan, I was about a fourth class, maybe third class citizen. First of all, there's the law professors and the administrators, and the law professors are first class citizens, and the administrators are lower. And then there's men and women, so I was a woman administrator. And so I quickly figured out that, and you couldn't get tenure as an administrator. And it also was I had to work a 40-hour week. I often worked more than 40 hours, but I had to be there. It was the kind of job where you had to be there. And I had a son, so I had no flexibility. I had to be there from 9 to 5. Whereas a professor, you can flex your hours very considerably depending on. And I had like 4 or 5 articles, and I tried to pick a place that was a good place to raise a kid. And I decided Columbus was a good place to raise a kid. And I really didn't want to go too far. I wasn't very adventurous.
All right. So you submitted an application?
Well, I'd have to go through a whole thing to explain how law professors get jobs. But the general answer to that is yes.
At the time that you decided that you were going to apply for this position in Columbus, did you know anything at all about the gay scene in Columbus, whether there was one or there wasn't one? Or
Didn't know, didn't care, truthfully. I just was more interested in the job.
All right. So you were hired at Ohio State.
Yes.
What year would have that been?
1976.
All right. Tell me about when you first came to Ohio State and Columbus. What were your first impressions?
Well, I was first of all, I was in a totally different job I'd never done before. And so I had to figure out how that worked. Second of all, I had a kid who had to go to school, and I had to figure out how that worked. And third of all, I had a partner who was also a lawyer, but who wanted to do poverty law. And she was working for something like AmeriCorps, but they had another name then. So we had a lot of things just to deal with. I settled in Beachwall. I think it's called Beachwall. Very nice place to live for kids. They can walk to school. Grass is green. You can play. You're probably not going to get mugged one way or the other. It was an adequate way to live.
In 1976, when you came to Ohio State, to the law school, were there other like minds at the law school that were there at the same time as you?
Doug Whaley was already at the law school, but he was still closeted. There was one law student whose name was Charles Munell, who the first day I was there, the Women's Law Caucus had taken me to lunch, and he came with the Women's Law Caucus and walked up to me while I was at the buffet, and he said to me, "Are you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I thought so." And from there, Charlie's mouth went.
How did you first, in Columbus at Ohio State, get involved with gay legal related issues, just in your scholarship and?
Well, actually, I shortly after I was there, I was admitted to the bar. It took me a little while to get admitted to the bar. I didn't have to take the test again, but I had to file enormous amounts of paper crap and give them lots of money. And once I got my ticket, I advertised as an openly gay lawyer. That was the first thing. What was your question?
How did you first start doing the gay legal scholarship?
Well, Gay Legal Scholarship actually started back in with the Gay Academic Union, because when I did that speech, I discovered that virtually nothing was published, and secondly, that virtually everything was hidden. That there was lots of gay information out there, but it was all hidden because people didn't want to talk about it, so they hid it in a variety of ways.
Can you explain what you mean by hidden?
Well, for example, the only way to find gay cases first we have to understand we didn't have LexisNexis then. It was like books and papers, in the library, and what we called indices. And indices were some indices were by subject matter. But if you went and looked under gay or lesbian or homosexual even, there's nothing there. You could look under sodomy, and you'd basically find two kind of cases under sodomy. Sodomy cases, criminal law sodomy cases, and military cases. But there were custody cases, and there were employment cases, and there were wills, probate cases that had to do with gay people. And you had to become like a detective. And once you learned how to detect, it was relatively easy to find them. Plus, if you found one case, of course, there might be a reference to another case. You followed the trail. But there was no nice index that said gay and lesbian law cases. Oh, there they are. I'll just go read all these. They didn't exist.
What were some of the clues beyond the sodomy and the military cases? What were some of the clues that might tip you off that a will case or a divorce case or...
Well, first of all, the names. If the names were JT versus VX, quite often they were hiding the names because, of course, being gay or being called gay would be terribly embarrassing, so they wouldn't be using their real names. Second of all, for example, in a custody case, when a woman would lose her children, there had to be an incredible reason, and usually it was because she was a lesbian. Will cases, again, it was sometimes the titles. A lot of it was serendipitous.
When you started advertising as an openly gay attorney, where was it that you advertised?
What was Herman's paper's name? Gay News?
It was a early gay newspaper in Columbus.
The guy who ran his name was Herman. I think his name was Herman, actually. Mm-hmm. Doug would know the name of the paper, and I have the paper at home. I just don't remember the name of it. It was a white, square, typed publication.
And this would have been in the late 70s that we're talking about?
Plus there was word of mouth.
And were there other attorneys practicing as openly gay in Columbus?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
So you had the market cornered.
One could say that. Harvey Shapiro might have been open in Newark. I'm not sure. Trying to think who would be the second one. Most gay people went to progressive lawyers like Mary Jo Kilroy and her partner, what was his name? There was some guy she practiced with who was, left-wing screwball nut. And that's where you'd probably start out to find somebody. And truthfully, I didn't do litigation because I was a law professor. I couldn't do it. But I could do most of the other stuff. And since nobody really wanted to litigate, that wasn't too much of a problem. It wasn't necessarily a winning strategy.
Did you ever experience any conflicts or difficulties at Ohio State as a result of being open about your gayness?
I feel that probably the whole time I was there, I was discriminated against in one way or another. But most of it was covert rather than overt.
Do any examples cross your mind as to some of the things that...
But I was also discriminated against as a woman, so it was hard sometimes to tell the difference. When I was offered the first salary that I had, I thought it was okay. I showed up, and I had made a deal for them to pay me during the summer because I had no income between when I left Michigan and when the fall started. And when I got here, they said, oh no, we never promised that. But luckily I had written it all down, so I got my summer money. About 4 years after I was at Ohio State, they had an equality commission, I think it was. And they looked at the salaries of all the women in all the departments. And the discrimination was so egregious that they recommended that all the people who had been discriminated, all the women who had been discriminated against, get immediate raises, and then they had to raise our salaries up to par. I think it was over a 3-year period. So there was about a 3-year period there when I got fantastic raises because they had really taken me to the cleaners. I believe to this day that I never got a professorship or a chair because I was gay. Another way, here's a subtle one. When anybody wrote anything or became an expert in anything, and I was the national expert in what I was writing, the law school would feature them as a speaker, and you'd speak to other faculty members about what you wrote or about your expertise. And in 20 years, I was never asked to speak to my colleagues.
Tell me a little bit about your scholarship and the kinds of things that you were writing about. If you have some articles that you're most proud of or some areas of research where you were a primary trailblazer.
Well, I wrote the first real article on gay and lesbian legal issues, the first article. And it was called Our Straight-Laced Judges, the Legal Position of Homosexual Persons in America. And after that, I wrote Sexual Preference Law, a follow-up called Sexual Preference Law. And I wrote 2 articles called Queer Law they were just updating all this. Plus, I kept finding old information. You know, I'd find a case that came from 1910 that I had not found before. So I kept updating them. And then when AIDS came in, I wrote an article called Some Notes from the Trenches about representing HIV positive people. I wrote chapters in books on homosexuality and legal issues, gay family legal issues. I wrote a chapter in a book on military and AIDS. No, just the military. And then I wrote one on military and AIDS. I've got a whole list of everything I wrote. The nicest thing that ever happened is 20 years. The first gay article was published in 1979, and in how did that work? 99, I guess it was. Yes, because I was in Arizona then. They got in touch with me, and they were going to republish the top 10 law review articles from 1900 on, whenever their law review started, that had been the most cited and the most reproduced. And so my article, I think, was number 4 or 5 out of these 10 articles. And so they were going to reproduce my article completely, and they asked you to write a companion article reflecting on the article. So I wrote, I think it's called 20 Years Later. And so that was published together with the original article.
What journal was that published in?
Hastings Law Journal.
Okay. Was that the others that you were discussing, were those primarily in Hastings, or were
the first one was Hastings, the second one was in Drake, and the third one was in Dayton. Almost every article I ever wrote was solicited by the law review, rather than me writing an article and then sending it out to law reviews. Law reviews solicited an article from me. So I never had to worry about getting published. But of course it meant that, I didn't send it out and see if Harvard would publish it. If Dayton asked me to do it, it's fine with me. So I did it for Dayton. And then I did a chapter in the AIDS and the Law textbook that was used for a long time. It's a long list.
Tell me about your interactions with other gay students at OSU.
I suppose there were two kind of interactions, which is that some gay students found it comforting to come and talk to me about being gay, and I tried to get them jobs and probably interfered in their social life. And some other gay students I never knew were gay because they were so closeted. One student told me once that all 3 years of law school they never talked to me because they were afraid that if they talked to me, everybody would know they were gay, which was a little egocentric, I think. But I hired a lot of my law clerks were gay, but not all my law clerks. And people said that I only hired gays. It's not true. I hired people that I liked. And I much preferred my students to my colleagues. So I spent a lot of time with my students and my law clerks. And we all had a good time.
Why did you have a preference for the students over the colleagues?
Because most of my colleagues were pompous assholes. Would that be a fair statement?
I believe that would be your characterization of them.
Yes.
You might tell them about the parties.
What parties?
You and Doug would host for the students.
Oh yeah, we'd always throw a party each year for the gay law students so they get to meet each other, and we'd bring in all the gay lawyers that we could round up who were going to be around then to meet the law students. I don't know how quick that got started, but eventually it was an institution.
Were there, when you first came to Ohio State back in '76, was there a gay law student group?
There was an incipient, very incipient, Charlie, the guy who said, "Are you?" and two gay women who were partners and had been partners since God created Earth and were in the law school. One of whom is now a professor of business law. And of course, her name, I can see her, but I can't come up with her name. The three of them incorporated themselves as the Gay Caucus, and they just never bothered to tell the law school that there were only three of them. And they ran around and did a whole bunch of things, and every so often they'd have one or two other people that helped them out. But they seemed bigger than they were, and they knew that. I mean, they did it on purpose. And at some points, the Gay Caucus got Bob Edlin. When Bob was my research assistant, he stirred them up for a couple of years. And then when he left, they pooped out. They have cycling strengths.
So how was it that, I understand that you were practicing as an attorney locally, serving gay clientele.
Right.
You were involved with the gay students at OSU. You were
Right.
publishing in that arena
Right.
at OSU. How was it that you also...
And I was teaching full time.
Right. and raising a kid.
Right.
How was it that you got involved in local gay politics?
Well, I gather that Jerry Falwell and the moral majority came here for some nefarious reason. And there were a group of guys who decided to picket them, which involved Craig Covey and Doug Whaley and three other guys who I thought I almost had the other name.
Val Thog?
Yeah, Val Thogmorton, Huffy, Craig
Huffman?
Huffman, and a fifth. Anyway, they decided to picket them and get other people to picket them. And they did picket them. I didn't picket them. But from that initial picketing, they decided to form a gay political group that they decided to call Stonewall Union. And they were having a meeting in Doug's living room when they noticed that there were no women. And so Doug called me up and said, "We need a woman. Will you be the woman?" I said, "Yes, as long as I don't have to come to meetings." So they used my name, and they did that for a while. And then Craig appeared on television with a non-gay woman who I didn't think was an ideal representative of the gay community, aside from the fact that she wasn't gay. And so I started going to meetings because I didn't want that to happen again. And so next thing you know, Craig and I were appearing on television. And
Would have this been 1981, 1982?
I would think around there, maybe 83.
Okay.
And every so often I'd get calls to go to the television station and debate some right-wing nut, or I'd go on OSU radio, and sometimes they'd just have me on to talk about law. Other times I went on and talked about gay issues on OSU. Actually, didn't I have a program for a while?
I don't know.
I think I did have a program where I went on OSU radio and just had like legal subjects, like what is a will and when should you have a will. But then also I used to get called on these programs to discuss gay legal issues, which were very exciting because they were call-in programs. And people would call in and threaten to kill me and threaten to kill the person I was talking to and tell us that we were sick, perverted, blah, 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 blah. So it gave a little piquant to life. I still have all sorts of tapes in my trunks of various radio talks that I gave.
So you served on the board of trustees for Stonewall?
Yes. I was first on the board as the woman, and then I became the president of Stonewall.
Do you recall what year that was?
No.
Okay.
And I became president on condition that I was allowed to reorganize it. I refused to they wanted me to become president. And I said no unless A, B, and C. And so I restructured the board to be 10 men and 10 women. And we pledged ourselves to gender equality in all our behavior. Most of these 20 people were friends or close acquaintances, and I proceeded to harass the shit out of them until they did all sorts of things. Elliot Fishman used to say that his secretary would say, Rhonda Rivera's on the line. He'd go, what am I supposed to have done? And he'd kick through his book. I'm supposed to have called this person, done that, and say, tell her I'll call her back in a few minutes. And then he'd do what he had to do, and they'd call back and say, oh, well, I talked to so-and-so, and I did that, and that's the way he handled it. If you want to hear about me as a slave-driving administrator, just get Bob Haverkamp to talk to you about it. He'll tell you I was an absolute bitch on wheels.
Was there any resistance to your request for gender equity?
It really wasn't resistance. It was just the trouble of getting 10 women. So I had to go out and beat the bushes and convince women to be on this board because Stonewall was perceived as an all-gay male, which it was in essence, and perceived as having a male agenda. And at that point, there were many lesbians who didn't want to get involved with gay men at the beginning, but not at the end.
Why do you think that was?
Well, because it's just the way the communities had grown up. Many of the gay men were misogynist, and many of the gay women hated men. I mean, there were some really, the Women's Action Collective and that group, some of the women's studies women were really, they had no use for men at all.
Separatists.
Separatists, thank you, that's exactly the right word. Lesbian separatists. Thespian leopardists, no. And but most people, I think, except for these people, 2 people on the extremes, I think they were happier when they were men and women. Everybody, it was much more relaxing, I think.
You mentioned before a male agenda versus a female agenda.
I mean, that was perception more than reality.
Can you tell me what would be a male agenda versus
a
a
male
female
agenda would be getting the police from stop raiding some park. A female agenda would be to get the police to enforce domestic violence law. A female agenda would be to have a group where lesbians and their children could get together and the kids could have friends. And Mary Ann helped organize the gay and lesbian parents of Franklin County, Southern Ohio, bigger than Franklin County. Male agenda might be to stop the cops from raiding bars, stop the cops from sitting outside of bars and waiting for people.
Tell me about City Council back in 1985 and the resulting video.
Oh, which one is it?
You Can Fight City Hall.
Oh, that's the video one. Okay, well, we thought we were all too clever. It basically started with Craig Covey because he met this woman who was running for council, and she, I think, seduced him, and not physically, seduced him into believing that, and he was a pretty clever Democratic operative, experienced political operative, and she led him to believe that if he worked his little ass for her and she got elected, she would vote for a gay and lesbian ordinance on employment. Well, Craig and his merry band of people got her elected. And so we got the ordinance drafted. And so we had to come up with, 5 votes. We thought we had Arlene Shoemaker. We knew we had Jerry Hammond. We thought we'd get Maury Portman because he was an old blind Democrat and a Jew. I went to Dorothy Cheater, who was our more patrician Republican, and I got her. She did really give a rat's ass. And she really said, if you can get 4 votes, I'll be the 5th. In other words, to solidify it. And I can't remember who the other people were. And when the time came, the first thing that happened was, I didn't know it at the time, but basically this church in, I think it was Pataskala, a very conservative, evangelical, fundamental church, heard about this was going to happen, although we tried to keep it as quiet as possible. And they actually bussed in 2 busloads of people who apparently frothed them out on cue. And we expected some opposition, but we didn't expect the whole council chamber to be filled with these people who were looking at you like they were going to cut your throat. And they were very vociferous. And they had a couple real nutcase ministers. One guy who used to preach on the corner at OSU in a black suit, and I really liked the word feces. That was probably his favorite word. And, he just ranted. The other guy was slightly less ranty. And I think they scared the devil out of the council members. It was like, ah! And they thought these people were their constituents. If we'd known, we could have said, well, will you please, everybody in the room, please stand up if you, and identify where you live, or show your driver's license to somebody or something, because these people were not their constituents, but they terrified them. And we had a pretty good, nice selection of people who spoke. We had a minister and all those kind of things. And we knew things were going downhill when Arlene Shoemaker, the person who Craig Covey in essence elected to the council, said, I want to explain my vote. Well, if she's going to vote yes, there was no reason to explain it. And Mary Ann remembered earlier today that she then committed a Freudian slip. How did it go?
She said she justified voting no because she said it was not a queer-cut law. And she was trying to say clear-cut, but it came out as clear as a bell on the tape, on the footage. Queer-cut law.
And then Maury Portman, who we thought would be on our side, sort of went off the deep end. I mean, he was an old-time Democrat, a Jewish guy, and he stood up and started ranting about Hitler and homosexuality. That Hitler's best friends were homosexuals, and we're all going, oh my God. So I think we got 2 votes, John Mahoney and Jerry Hammond. It was a pretty disappointing time. And Vivian Schaefer, who was worked at OSU. I don't know if she worked or was studying at OSU. Took the footage off of public access television and intertwined it with interviews. And I thought it won some award.
It was excellent, I thought.
It was a good sort of encapsulated what happened. And then, I don't know how many years it was later, we were much even sneakier than ever. Cindy Lazarus was the chair of the council then, and she's always been pro-gay. Greg Leshepka, who was a Republican, was the mayor. My job was to go and see if Leshepka would, 1, not try to stop it, and 2, sign it if it passed. And one evening, like at 7 o'clock at night, I had this meeting with him in his office in City Hall, I guess. He agreed that he wouldn't try to stop it and he would sign it. He was, in those old-fashioned days of moderate Republicans. And Mary Ann reminded me that we put on sort of a little song and dance show for him. We brought in bar owners and store owners and citizens off the street and stuff to show him that gay people were a positive cultural and financial asset to the society. And but I think he really didn't have any objection to it whatsoever. His wife was a law student, had been a law student friend of a number of friends of ours, and we were pretty sure what his politics were. Whether, of course, he was going to act on his politics or do something political, we had no way of knowing until I went and talked to him. But it was, and then so we brought it up, but it just sailed through secretly. And they tried to do something. It had to do with, wasn't there a way to recall it after a certain number of days, and it didn't work, and so the thing went into effect. But we were much smarter at that time than we were the first time. We also didn't get shafted either.
You also, I believe, worked with Governor Celeste or his administration to make some positive changes at the state level. Is that correct?
Yes, which have been since destroyed, of course. Governor Celeste had promised the gay community a executive order banning discrimination in state government. And of course, like all politicians, they promise one thing, and then when it gets to be real, they start to get nervous. But he stuck to it. Took us a while to get him to move. We had to, but I helped draft it. George Painter, who no longer lives here, was very involved in that. And he signed it. I was there when he signed it, and a number of, I'm sure Doug was there, and
Carol Fay was there.
Carol Fay was there. There must have been about 10 gay folks that were there. And he signed it and gave us all pens, and we had our pictures taken, and it went into effect. And my favorite part about it was, shortly after it went into effect, there was this state trooper, who I still write to every Christmas, was openly gay, and he wanted to move his post from somewhere in Ohio to another place in Ohio that was near where his mother lived, because his mother was getting old, and he wanted to be near her. And just to make his life miserable, first of all, they accused him of being HIV positive, which he wasn't. And second of all, they refused to let him move, which he was entitled to based on his seniority and all this kind of stuff. So I took up his case and dealt with the state police. It was a very unfriendly relationship. And they had no choice under the new executive order but to do it. And they put him where he belonged. And he got to retire from there. He's now retired. And that was cool.
Who first came up with the idea of obtaining that at the state level, and why was the governor even interested in promising our community anything?
Well, first of all, we are a pretty good, not as good as we could be, but we are a voting bloc. We tend to be the kind of people who vote. There's a lot of groups where they're groups, but they don't vote. Second of all, he was an honest liberal. Third, his wife was a flaming liberal, feminist. Some people thought a little bit screwy. She had a lot of friends in the gay community. And Dick Celeste basically did it because it was right. Now, that, just because it's right didn't mean he rushed, but, that's why he did it. He was a good person. And then the Voinovich didn't overturn it. But then Taft came in, and I gather he has overturned all our good work. That's the problem with executive orders.
Did you attend the first Pride Parade and rally at the State House back in 1982?
Doug Whaley and I were there for the parade to start. And we'd gotten the right permits. In fact, Craig had gotten the right permits. And all of a sudden, the police roared up. And they said, you can't, we're gonna march in the street. And they said, no, you'll have to go on the sidewalks. I'm trying to remember how this all went. You have to go on the sidewalks. And we said, we don't want to go on the sidewalks. She said, well, if you go on the street, then you have to have police protection. And we said, thank you. And they said, no, you don't understand. You have to pay for police protection. And so we said, well, how much is that? And I don't remember, Doug would probably tell you to the dollar. But he and I split we paid half, each paid half. And then our friend David Goldberger from law school sued over it subsequently. And we lost. It was a very unsuccessful situation. But that's the way we marched after we paid off the police. And we had to pay them off every year until that changed under one of the mayors. Maybe it was Leshevka. Oh, I know what it was. It was that I think we did force them the mayor, I know how the mayor got around it. The mayor, what was that little smart-ass guy who was mayor?
Buck Reinhardt?
Yes, and he got the judge did say that it had to be non-discriminatory, that if the police were going to protect everybody, then everybody had to pay. And so Buck got around it by having, as mayor, he would sponsor every parade except the gay parade. So by sponsoring it, it became a city parade, and the police, you didn't have to pay the police. So the only people who were ending up paying the police were us. Now, what happened next? I think under Leshevka,
everybody had to pay.
That's it. I think he made everybody pay.
So, St. Patrick's Day pays,
right.
Everybody pays now.
Of course, they ditched. So, it was depended on the mayor.
What kind of a crowd was there at the first? Do you recall?
Well, first of all, in the beginning parades, there was nobody on the sides who were supportive. And there were maybe 800 people. Does that sound about right?
I didn't go to the first place.
And the people on the sides, there were a whole bunch of, especially down near the park, there was a whole bunch of Bible banging. There was one guy who was a Baptist minister, and we had some fun with him because he was standing there and saying, you're all, waving his Bible, you're all going to hell. And Margaret was in a mood. That was my partner then. She walked up to him and said, hi, I understand you're a Baptist. And he said, yes. And she said, my father was a Baptist minister. The poor guy ruined his day. But over time, there grew to be more protesters on the side, as well as more people clapping. There was one year that was particularly virulent when we marched down and we went across the bridge to, where did we go across the bridge to?
Where COSI is now, there was a
Amphitheater. Right. And these folks that wanted to protest us lined the bridge in like 2 or 3 persons thick. And we're making all these. It's amazing what people who are portraying themselves as loving Christians will say. And secondly, and people who were claiming that we were dangerous to their children, they would bring their children to watch their parents call these people walking by horrible names, things I wouldn't call anybody, you know. And I think that was the worst one. And then they began to, you know, sort of slaw off. And there became more people who would actually clap. And I don't know I'm sure there are still protesters today, but how many there are, I don't know. You can tell me.
Tell me about your experiences with the AIDS crisis here in Columbus.
I remember actually reading in the New York Times about the strange virus among gay men. And I cut it out and put it in a file. And I still have that paper today. Then when I realized how important it was, I put it in plastic, you know, and I still got it at home.
They called it something like GRID.
Right, gay-related
immunodeficiency.
The virus, something, GRID.
I mean, it wasn't AIDS then.
Yeah,
it wasn't
GRID.
HIV.
And, but that was New York. We were in Columbus. I'm pretty sure it was 1984 that I helped found Integrity of Columbus, which is the Episcopal gay group. And it was almost all men. And a friend of mine named Jack,
Balser.
Thank you, Balser. He's 10 years younger, more than 10 years younger, 15 years younger, 20 years younger, I forget. 20 years, 10? Anyway, revealed to everybody in the Integrity Circle that he had GRID, AIDS, HIV, whatever. And as a consequence of, we thought he'd just kick off immediately, relatively soon, we decided to form a support group for him. All of a sudden, there began to be more than just Jack. And so a group of people, Howard Fradkin was one of the main pushers. And let me think, who else? Pete. And his partner, Pete Kengetter, who was a nurse. Actually, Dennis's Bobby O'Connor, who was a nurse. Dennis is dead now, not of AIDS. Why he wasn't dead of AIDS amazed everybody. Howard, Peter, Bob O'Connor, my partner, Margaret Morris, and a couple guys from Integrity actually met in my living room and formed the Columbus AIDS Task Force. I wasn't a member of the original task force group. What I was is, I don't know if I was head of, or I represented the legal subcommittee. Our job was to do wills and medical powers and fight. And they went on to be an absolutely marvelous organization. As a concept, I did a lot of pro bono work for persons with AIDS. And as a consequence of that work, I wrote a law review article called Some Notes from the Trenches, where I used a combination of practice skills and legal research and this and that, and sort of talked about the issues that came up in an AIDS situation and how you could handle them. It was reproduced by Lambda, and for many years was used as their training book for attorneys. It's now totally out of date. And until I left, I had persons with AIDS who were my pro bono clients. They were all, I should say, there were more in the beginning, but then, toward the end, people were staying alive. But in that first 5 or 6 years, I had a book, still got it at home, a notebook where I used to put people's pictures and funeral notice. Went to a lot of funerals.
What was the local Columbus response by the non-gay community? Was there a positive response, a negative response, or just no response at all?
Well, first of all, there were a number of people involved in the Columbus AIDS Task Force, mostly women, not all women, no, women and doctors who were not gay, who were extremely involved. In fact, the first technically executive director full-time of the Columbus AIDS Task Force was Gloria somebody, who was a non-gay woman. Dr. Para of OSU, who was the head of infectious diseases, who was, quote, the AIDS doctor, was involved, and he was wonderful. There was a second doctor from Riverside, whose name escapes me right now. There were a number of, and the social worker for the Columbus AIDS Task Force in the beginning was a woman from Upper Arlington who went on to become a deacon in the Episcopal Church, Nancy Brandenburg. I got a name. So there were a number of people who were very involved and helpful. And then there were a lot of people who were indifferent. And of course, when we had parades, there were always people there with signs saying, you know, AIDS is God's punishment for your vile perversions or whatever. But the city, trying to think, I can't remember that. I'd have to do some research to remember who was mayor and how they reacted. I don't remember.
Did you have...
OSU was pretty good. The university was pretty good. Not at first, but they came around.
Did you have lots of clients who were having discrimination problems?
I mean, the ones I represented, especially in the beginning, weren't so much discrimination problems. Like, you know, being fired, although they were fired. But they were too sick to care that they were fired. Most of the stuff I dealt with in the beginning was wills and medical powers, getting them on either Medicaid or Medicare, getting them disability, Social Security disability. And with Social Security disability or Medicaid, once you knew the formula, the question was filling out the papers correctly. And once we got the Columbus AIDS Task Force up and really running, they filled out papers for people. Nancy Brandenburg did, and they didn't need a lawyer for that. A lot of other lawyers helped out at various times, certainly Elliott, Sheila Clark, Scott Dewhurst. Oh, and there were some non-gay lawyers that helped out. John from the university, John Quigley, and Mary Jo Kilroy's partner, who I can't remember, and Mary Jo.
You mentioned Dignity as being an organization.
No, Integrity.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Dignity is the Catholic,
right.
Integrity is the Episcopalian.
I'm sorry. You mentioned Integrity, and we've talked about Stonewall.
Mm-hmm.
Were there other organizations, GLBT organizations locally that you were involved with?
I was peripherally involved with the gay students on OSU Gay something. Didn't we figure the name of
Gay
it?
Activist Alliance.
Gay Activist Alliance. The guy that was in charge of it was, every so often they had me come and make a speech for them or write an article for them, but I wasn't, on a regular basis. I belonged to Lambda Legal Defense, but that was in New York. I was on the board twice. American Association of Law Schools. I founded the gay and lesbian, with Art Leonard, founded the Gay and Lesbian Legal Issues section.
Is that the same as the SALT, Society of American?
Oh, well, that wasn't a gay organization. That was Society of American. I was president of the Society of American Law Teachers for a while. But they were very supportive of AIDS and very supportive of gay people, but they weren't all gay.
When we were talking before about male agenda versus female agenda, with regard to the male agenda, you mentioned some police-related things.
Oh, yes.
Were there problems in Columbus between our community and the police?
Oh, yes. There were a number of different problems. One was raids on the bars for made-up reasons. Oh, I just got a report that there was a riot going on in here, In fact, one of the first things that ever happened to me when I was here was this guy called me up. He was a doctor who had been in some gay bar when they came in and raided it, and he was terrified. I went and bailed him out. But the person who actually handled the cases almost exclusively was Scott Dewhurst. The people that he represented almost always got off because the police almost always did things wrong. But the real problem was men who got arrested and they were afraid of defending themselves, so they just went down and pled guilty and therefore got criminal records and paid record fines. And the police would tell them, they'd lie to them. They'd say, well, the best thing you can do is just go down and plead guilty because otherwise you're going to go to state prison for the rest of your life. I mean, these people were so scared. They just ran down and did what the police said. The second was the issues of sex in the parks. My friend Dennis Cox said to me something about, well, that's against their constitutional rights. I said, Dennis, nobody has a constitutional right to have sex in the parks. And the problem what the police did, we had a law that made it illegal for people of the same sex to solicit a person of another same sex.
Importuning.
Yes, but it had to be offensive to the person who was importuned. Well, if you're a gay person and some other gay person solicits you, you're not offended, okay? So, and the police would take their recruits and dress them in, they'd take the best looking hunks they could find and put them in tight pants and tight shirts and tie a kerchief around one arm or something, or stick a kerchief in their pocket or, something, and send them into the parks. Actually, gay men are pretty careful what they say, what they may do and what they may signal is one thing, but what you say to somebody, they're relatively careful about because they know some of the consequences. And so a lot of these cops actually, what's that phrase? When you make somebody do a crime, you put
Entrapment?
ended up doing things that were constituted entrapment. But then we had the same problem, which is people would get arrested, would never go to Scott or any other lawyer. They just run down and plead guilty and pay their money. So, and we also couldn't challenge the constitutionality of people running down and doing that. But if Scott got a hold of them, a lot of judges, even pretty straightforward judges, didn't like it because basically, these nubile, what's the word I'm looking for? Nubile young men running around in tight clothes, Scott would say, officer, were you wearing your uniform when you were down in the park? Well, no. What were you wearing? What did you wear? What kind of pants did you have on? Well, I had slacks. Or were they tight slacks? Well, they were just slacks. Were they tighter than the slacks I have on? Well, yeah. Did it show your testicles and your penis? Well, I suppose. And they'd say, what kind of shirt did you have? Scott had them. Literally, he'd have them describe their outfits, and by that time, the judge is going. And then they'd say, well, what did you do? Were you just standing there when this man came up to you? How were you standing? Where were you standing? Were you standing like out on the street corner under a light? Well, no. Where were you standing? Well, I was standing next to a tree. Well, was this tree on the edge of the park, or what was it? What was in the park? How many feet in the park? 20, 30 feet. And could you be seen from that? Oh, no. So here you got these pictures of these young, sexy cops in tight clothing, standing in the dark, virtually, amongst the trees. And then he'd say, well, who spoke first? And he got a lot of them thrown out on entrapment. But he also then started working on the idea. How did he phrase it? He said, he used the offensive part. I'm trying to remember how it went, but, I know what it was. He'd say, well, you went into the park, right? And you were dressed like this, right? And your job was to see if you were importuned by a gay man. And they said yes. That wasn't anything they had to hide. And he'd say, well, then when you said that Joe so-and-so came up and said, let's fuck, buddy. guy said, yeah, that's what he said to me. He says, well, were you offended? Oh, yeah, I was terribly offended. Well, how could you be offended when that was the reason you went there? You know, and since being offended was part of the element of the crime, I mean, when Scott did them, virtually nobody ever got convicted. And then at some point, we tried to work with the police. Scott had been in the prosecutor's office before he was a private attorney, and he knew many of the people in the prosecutor's office. And so we would meet with them and say, look, we don't think sex in the park should go on any more than you do. But it's a fact of life that there are some people who have sex in the park, and there's some heterosexuals who have sex in the park, but they just don't get arrested. But if you want to get rid of gay men having sex in the park, there's some simple things you can do. One, you know, you have your cops out on patrol. Just have a uniformed policeman in a designated cop car with the lights on. Just drive through the park slowly once every 45 minutes, and trust me, you're not going to have much sex in the park. And the other one was, we noticed that the bushes were down, is cut out the bushes so that, you know, people really can't hide, you know. No, we got to catch these criminals. And we'd say, you know, it'll save you a lot of money. It'll save you policemen, you know. But they were just absolutely focused on how much they had to do this. But I think eventually they began to make inroads into them. Plus they started losing big time. And then the Solicitation Act was finally declared unconstitutional. I don't know if it ever did go all the way up to the Supreme Court. It was just in Cincinnati or just here. It's an appellate level, right?
I think it was challenged on the basis that it wasn't a crime to solicit somebody of the opposite sex.
Right.
Well, it was a crime, and so it was on an equal protection basis.
Right.
And I don't remember if it was specifically in Columbus that it was challenged.
Yeah. I think it was challenged in Cincinnati and lost. And at first, the other circuits around the state refused to apply it. But eventually, they all came to recognize. I don't know. Scott could tell you the history of that. I don't remember, but it was a victory of sorts. You know.
Why do you think the police had such a problem with gay people, or a desire to arrest gay people?
Well, first of all, police are into power. Let's start there. Most police are into machoism, and so they have to prove something to everybody. In general, policemen don't like gay people. And exactly where that all comes from, I haven't the faintest idea. But they were just... And plus, you know, we would have lost the vice squad if half the vice squad wouldn't have had a job if they didn't go in the parks and arrest gay people. And actually, there's also let me just put it on the other side. I really would like the parks to be a public place. If I have kids, I want to send my little boy into the bathroom. It's not that I'm worried that they're going to jump on him, but I don't see any reason for him to see people having sex in the bathroom, whether it's the ladies' bathroom or the men's bathroom. Most of this, but not all of it, took place when very few other people were in the parks. But it also meant that when you went walking the parks the next morning, you could find condoms and all sorts of poppers, whatever else. They weren't environmentally sound. So I think you know, and I understand why some people, why do people have sex in the park? Some people do it because they don't have any other place to have sex. Those happen to be mostly married men who can't go home. And other people go to the parks because an element of their sexual life is risk. You know, just having sex with somebody is not enough. You have to be worried you're going to be arrested. Well, then when you get arrested, you're really not very happy, but it's the riskiness of it. So, that you know, the police are traditionally homophobic. Maybe because it used to be an all-male, generally the police were all-male, and anytime you were in an all-male group, you had to prove that you weren't a bunch of faggots, you were real men, so you had to be homophobic.
What was it that you were talking before? You said the police, you know, raiding bars and raiding the park. What was it that people were charged with typically, if there was a typical thing, in the bar raids?
Inside the bar, you might be, well, first of all, they always tried to make sure that they kept, if you were serving minors, if you were, it used to be, now I don't know how far back we want to go, if two men or two women were dancing together at one point, that was lewd behavior. Then there were actually the Liquor Commission, what's it called? ABC Commission, I don't know, Liquor Commission. You couldn't maintain a disorderly house, and by their very nature, the people who were gay made it a disorderly house. You know, these things changed over time. As I said, around Jack's, they enforced traffic laws that nobody had ever heard of. I mean, parking meters and parking next to fire plugs, you know, they measure, okay, it's supposed to be 20 feet. Oh, look, it's only 19 feet, 7 inches. I mean, it was pure harassment. You know, they found something that they would never think about prosecuting. And then, of course, there were legitimate prosecutions for DWI. But the problem with that, and I have no objection to publications of people being arrested, I prefer that people be arrested before they drive while drunk, is that they weren't sitting outside of, you know, these heterosexual date bars where men and women went to meet and heist a few and then go home together. There was just probably, I'm sure, actually, from a matter of statistics, there were more DWIs there than there would be at the gay bars. Well, that might not be true at some periods of time. But anyway, it was just harassment, and they used anything they could find. Whether it was really, you know, it might be right on the edge, but, you know, as I said, these people were terrified. They very seldom ever fought it in court, so the police could get away with almost anything that sounded good.
You mentioned before about the protest that some people had organized when Jerry Falwell was in town,
Yeah.
and we talked a little bit about some of the gay pride marches. Are you aware of any other rallies or protests that took place in Columbus?
Well, there was Martin Luther King Day rallies where they usually had a gay speaker. As I was saying, I guess it was yesterday, the first speech I ever gave in Columbus was at a Martin Luther King rally. But if you mean a specifically gay event, I don't know of any. I mean, if you mentioned one, I might say yeah, but I don't know.
If I could try to
Sure.
trigger your memory a little bit, around 1985, 1986, right after the Bowers versus Hardwick decision came out.
Oh, we had a candlelight vigil, didn't we?
Yeah, but there was the Pride Parade that year amassed at Goodell Park and marched to the State House lawn where the rally was held. And the parades in those days were more political as opposed to celebratory.
Yes, joyous occasions of conviviality.
The protesters immediately ran down to City Hall and got a permit for the next year to have the grounds at the State House so they could have a rally there and thwart the gay rally.
Right.
And that was when the decision was made to go across the bridge to the amphitheater, which was across from the old Central High School. We had to move our site because the protesters had come in and gotten a reservation, jumped ahead of us in the line. I mean, they were using some of the same tactics that we did to try to disrupt our activities. Do you remember that?
Yeah, but other than what you've said, that doesn't trigger anything extra.
Okay, sorry.
I remember walking across that bridge. That was the scare. I think that in terms of walking, that was the scariest year.
I thought there was something related to Anita Bryant, too.
Oh, orange juice. One year we had, when we were down at the State House, the state troopers had to, in theory, protect us. And, of course, I already had a reputation with the state troopers because I represented this guy. And then we had our own security. People were taught to do nonviolent security. And one of the state troopers came up to me, because at that moment I happened to be on the stage, and said, we've just had a call that there's a bomb under the stage, and we suggest that all of you leave. And I didn't, first thought was, well, if there's a bomb, but is it a ploy, So I went to the microphone and I said to everybody, I would like everybody to sit down, because what I didn't want was everybody to run to the exit, because more people would get hurt running than anything else, panicking. So everybody just, it's like I'd ask them, to put your arms across your chest. Everybody just sat down. And then I said, we've just had the state, I said to the state police, well, aren't you going to go under and look? And it's too dangerous. So our security people went under and looked. And while they were looking, I said, we've just gotten this report that somebody may have planted a bomb under this platform. And our security people are checking it out right now. I said, but I would like those people who have brought your children here, and I brought mine, to please take your kids and leave. And the rest of you all stay seated so that these folks, and anybody who's handicapped, if you're in a wheelchair or on crutches, please leave the area so that you don't get hurt. And so I sent Robert home with somebody, I can't remember who, people who had baby carriages and their kids, and they all exited, and the rest of the people were all sitting there. And I said, okay, now I'd like to do this in an orderly way. So anybody who would now like to leave, would you please stand up and walk slowly away from the platform? Meanwhile, our people are under the platform, and they haven't found diddle squat. And nobody stood up. And I said, are you sure you don't want to go? And they go, hell no, we won't go. They just stayed there. And luckily, we all didn't blow up. It worked out pretty well. So to this day, I don't know if it was a legitimate report or they were just trying to scare us. But I don't really remember any. There were some protests of some kind, I think, on OSU campus over various things. But did we have a protest over the military coming to OSU?
The law school
Yeah.
wouldn't let the military recruit there.
Huh?
The law school wasn't. When I was in law school, I don't believe they were allowing JAG to come in and recruit.
Right. We lost that in the Supreme Court, but that was inevitable, I'm afraid.
What sorts of social activities related to the GLBT community were available when you first came to Columbus in '76?
Well, for women, there were the bars. There were lectures and events from the women's studies.
What were the bars that you recall?
Well, the only one I really knew was Jack's for women. And Marianne pointed out that the real name of it is Summit Station. And there was the Women Music Union, which used to put on concerts, both of local talent and bring in outside talent. For men, there were bars, and a different kind of bars. There were regular bars and leather bars and bar bars. And among the very quiet, more wealthy gay men, there were some private, I don't know if you call them clubs or organizations. There was also the Berwick, which was the Halloween thing at the Berwick Manor House, or whatever the name of it was.
When you came here...
But as time developed, and I don't know, it was relatively quick. I mean, we had an incredible bowling league of gay and lesbian bowlers. And there were more bowlers in the gay and lesbian leagues than almost, it was amazing how many there were. And there were other clubs. There was an antique car club. Gay people form amazing social groups that I can't think of right now. I can't remember if we had square dancing here. We have square dancing in Albuquerque. Before I left, we had ballroom dancing for lesbians. That was the one thing I really missed when I moved to Tucson, was my ballroom dancing.
Did men and women socialize together?
I think so, but not as much as they did subsequently.
How about people of different racial backgrounds?
At least most people were involved were white. There was an occasional, I'm talking about the political organizations, there was an occasional black person, and we tried very hard, desperately to recruit black men or black women to the boards and various things. A lot of them, if you found somebody who was black would be a good member, and you didn't set the bar too high because you just wanted truthfully color. A lot of them didn't want to serve because they weren't out and didn't want to be out. This is more true of the men than the women. We didn't do very well, but I'm not sure. I didn't know any other way to. We were limited by our whiteness in the sense that that didn't help us recruit any black people. We did have some Hispanics. They were easier to deal with.
When you think about how things may have changed between the 70s and today, is there anything or a couple of things that seem more remarkable or upward?
Well, you think that I had dinner last night with two men friends of mine, one of whom's an attorney, who's a partner in a major law firm here, and he's out of his law firm. And so that's a significant difference right there. So I think there's more professionals. And professionals are easier to be out because in a sense you control your own destiny more than people who are just plain employees. There's a lot of, doctors, lawyers, dentists, psychiatrists, and psychologists, all people who control their destinies a little more than the average employee who are out. And it doesn't mean they aren't. The other people aren't out too. I know at least two postmen. So there's a lot of people. There's also still a lot of people who are terrified and aren't out. Obviously things have improved. At the same time, there's also a bigger. We're now the official scapegoats for the right wing because it's no longer politically nice, even though they may not dislike black people any more than they ever did, or no more want women in position than they ever did. They aren't as acceptable to say things about or do things to anymore. In fact, the Republicans, anybody who's a black Republican, they'll make you and appoint you to anything because, look at Clarence Thomas. They don't care about qualifications. But right now, we're the scapegoats because we still can be a boogeyman to the average, or at least to certain groups of people. It's a way to raise money. It's a way to raise fear. Somehow we're going to destroy the American family if divorce and adultery and don't do it and domestic violence. So things are certainly better, but I would predict that if we aren't successful in breaking the Republicans' hold on the houses and eventually on the presidency, that things will get a lot worse for gay people because it's not that it won't get worse for blacks and women too, it will. But the progression is, I think, it's like who they come first for. And I think they'll come first for gay people because they are the least accepted group.
When you think about your life so far, what are the things that you're most proud of?
My son.
Anything else?
I'd say my students. I spend a lot of time trying to help my students be honest, responsible attorneys, have ethics, do pro bono, be good people. And I've got students all over who are all doing that. And so I'd say my students for second.
In your time in Columbus, if you had to say this was the most important GLBT issue, or this was the most important GLBT event, or whatever that occurred in your time here, is there anything that comes to mind that you would?
Well, I think the most important thing is that men and women learn to work together, because I think that's what gives strength to this community. And there are other communities where it's not true.